Senator Scott bringing the fire to his announcement this morning. Watch.
Joe Biden and the radical left are attacking every single rung of the ladder that helped me climb. And that's why I'm announcing today that I'm running for president of the United States of America.
Let's get ready to rumba. The GOP field's getting more crowded by the minute, and we're still 9 months out from the first primary. So who's got the best shot? Let's get into it with tonight's party panel. We've got Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor, the Charlie Hurt. He is joined by Democrat strategist, radio host, and proud Angelino, also a Fox News contributor, Leslie Marshall. And rounding it out tonight, senior editor and best-selling author from Reason, Robbie Suave. Hello, one and all. All right, so bottom line it for me, Charlie. Hey, Charlie, give me your top four so far of those who have entered or are about to enter the field.
So I would have to start with Donald Trump. I disagree with you. I do think that he can win a general. And although the polling right now is totally irrelevant, I do think that it's going to be, as people were so furious in 2016 with politics and politicians, I think people are even more furious today, and so he's got that same wind at his back. Second, I would Ron DeSantis, for all the reasons you pointed out. Florida is free. He's got a great record. He will be president one day. I just don't think that it will necessarily be in 2024. Vivek Ramaswamy, and I want to be very careful about this because I know that this is Ron Paul fan club headquarters, but Vivek Ramaswamy reminds me a lot of Ron Paul because he is so interesting. He's so out of the box. He's a very principled sort of guy talking about principled political things, which I love very much. And then my number 4 spot goes to, if we're going to talk about COVID, if this election is going to be all about COVID, there was only one governor in America who was truly principled on COVID, and that was Kristi Noem of South Dakota. She was the only one who said, you know what, I'm not going to put in all these mandates because I don't have the power to put them in. And so if DeSantis and Trump want to get into a fight over that, I say you give it to Kristi Noem.
I don't think she's going to get the nomination. She doesn't have any foreign policy credentials, and the further we get from COVID, the less name recognition and pull she has. But I don't
disagree with me on the COVID stuff.
I don't disagree with you about that at all. I think there are very few governors who led by example. It was the tougher thing to do because they were lonely out there. All right, so Leslie, who do you like? Either who do you think really has the best shot at getting the GOP nomination, or is it Democrat? Who would you like to see run against your nominee?
I don't want to see anybody run against my nominee. I don't think any party does. But on the right, I think Donald Trump, I actually... I think it's the better horse to bet on is when you have a sitting president, the incumbent. That's not my opinion. That's just numbers and history. You know, when we look at the GOP, I do think Donald Trump has a great chance to get the nomination. I think 3 others, simply because of name recognition. That's the #1 reason people vote, regardless of their ideology, is somebody's name is recognizable to them. So Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, and of course Ron DeSantis, and not in that order. Now, everybody out there other than Donald Trump, in my opinion, is running for vice president, except for Mike Pence, who's, I don't know why he's running, because he's not going to be vice president, and he's not going to be president. I don't know. Maybe he likes punishment. I'm just not sure.
Maybe he just wants
those would be my 4 for the GOP based on name recognition.
Yeah, but I see where Vice President Pence is coming from because he's almost been to the summit. Like, he's almost been there, and he wants to go back. But, Robbie, you say there's only 2 people in the race. Everyone else
it's Trump or DeSantis.
Yeah.
It's Trump or DeSantis. That's it. I think, the horse race of it is a lot of fun, especially for us as political junkies. But let's be real. It's going to be Trump or DeSantis. And every person who enters the race who's not one of those people makes it a little bit harder, I think, for DeSantis to get to the nomination because Trump is going to keep his coalition together. There are some people who maybe voted for him in the past and are done with him, and they're looking for someone else. If that vote splinters with Pence and Nikki Haley and Tim Scott, maybe Chris Christie wants to run, that kind of thing, Trump's going to walk to the nomination that much easier. For my taste on who I would like to see, I'm still waiting for the candidate, Kennedy, who's going to speak to you and me, who says, on everything, I just want to leave you alone. There are candidates who pick up the leave you alone message on various fronts, like DeSantis's message on COVID, like, what Trump had to do on foreign policy, charting a little bit of a different path away, imperfectly, but away from the Republican intervened consensus. But I want a candidate who gives me all of those things, who says, I'm not running to rule your life, and the government has far too much power over it, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, whatever I did right
that.
during COVID, I want to do that for everything. I haven't heard that from DeSantis yet, but I'm like you. I'm going to keep pressing. No one deserves my vote. It is not a foregone conclusion. You got to work for it. Now, meanwhile, on the donkey side of the divide, Sleepy Joe's on a steep climb to 2024, according to a new AP poll. Wow, just 33% of adults approve of his handling of the economy, but at 80 years young, he really doesn't have much left to grasp onto. Even the Washington Post calling Biden's age a real issue, adding, quote, the public has a right to know details about his health, physical and mental, and about what he is doing to maintain it, end quote. And now Hillary Clinton, she's piling on about Biden's age. Watch this. Yeah, there is no alternative. We're all going to die. So are Democrats smelling blood in the water, Charlie?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's so great to listen to people like Hillary Clinton and the Washington Post now say that we should be concerned about his age. Of course, that's because Joe Biden has performed the only task they wanted him to perform, which is to get into the White House and get Donald Trump out of the White House. But you watch, if we wind up back in a fight between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, all of these people are suddenly not going to care about the fact that Joe Biden needs to be surrounded by visiting angels.
I am moving to Panama if that happens, and I'm starting a cult.
Can I come?
Yeah, it's very lucrative. It's going to be a great time. They have tons of surf spots, wonderful food. We could build little Ron Paul yurts. We'll have dolls. We'll have voodoo dolls. We'll have all of it, Charlie. It's going to be, that's going to be one hell of a...
It'd be like Easter Island, except Ron Paul's instead of those giant-headed things.
I like those giant-headed things. Speaking of giant-headed things, I don't think Chris Christie is going to run. But let's get back to the president's age. It's funny, Charlie brings up the point, the Washington Post is finally getting around to this. Yes, people knew his age mathematically in 2020, but I don't think they anticipated the decline. Don't we, as the Post pointed out, Leslie, deserve to know more about his health and his medical status?
Well, first of all, here's the problem, and this was just described to me by somebody taking care of somebody in my own family who has some questionable dementia and Alzheimer's, and they said there's really no, when people get all over me on Twitter, there is not a specific test that says that you have it, you're getting it. We technically are all dying physically and mentally from about 25 on. How do we do that? There's a lot factored in, genetics, the environment, the list goes on. So you can probably, just like you can ask 10 doctors a question and get 10 different answers, we could have that for any sitting president, and anybody in any administration could pick and choose the answers they want from different physicians. I'm going to agree with Charlie on two things, which is unusual. One, he said at the beginning of this segment that we're way too far out for the polls to matter, and I agree, including these polls about and against Joe Biden. Speaking of polls, didn't seem to hurt him regardless of the polling in the midterm elections. That tsunami never came. And then third, I will agree with the second thing Charlie said, which is if it is a race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, age is not going to matter to those who right now are concerned about Joe Biden's age. There are going to be other issues that matter. And sorry, Charlie, I disagree with you on this. It's not going to be COVID. It's going to be the economy. It's going to be the economy, but
unfortunately, okay, Leslie, we got to move on a little bit.
I agree.
Okay. Robbie, if the economy is the driving issue, and it typically is, Biden polling at 30%, take his age out of it, that's a garbage number.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are right to note that people miss the Trump economy. They know that, especially at the state level, Republicans have done a better job, not running up bloated government, having a saner tax policy, keeping businesses obviously open during COVID, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. At the national level, sometimes Republicans squander this, again, by not challenging Democrats on these wasteful, gigantic entitlement programs that, you want to talk about an elderly president, his policies, Joe Biden's policies, and all the rest of them, frankly, we have such an old government. They're tilted toward this entitlement state, our aging population, that is harmful to younger people who are having worse prospects, not because the free market screwed them, but because government takes too much of their income
and guess
to
what?
pay for the elderly.
They're not having babies at the same rate as prior generations, so no one's going to take care of the youngs when they are old. The party panel returns in just a little bit in the show. Now, meanwhile, is the highest court finally waking up to freedom? Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch did not mince words on his view of the pandemic lockdowns, saying in a statement, quote, "Since March 2020, we may have experienced the greatest intrusions on civil liberties in the peacetime history of this country. This comes as the Supreme Court dismisses red states' push to preserve Title 42. Gorsuch called out elected officials for failing to address the border crisis and pushing responsibility to the court, saying the current border crisis is not a COVID crisis. So will Congress follow suit after they get the message? The party panel is back. Charlie Hurt, Leslie Marshall, and Robbie Suave. Robbie, I want to read you a quote from Justice Gorsuch. He wrote, "The concentration of power in the hands of so few may be efficient and sometimes popular, but it does not tend toward sound government." Do those words ring true with you, Robbie?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, in some ways, the Supreme Court was our last line of defense against total COVID tyranny during the pandemic. SCOTUS obviously struck down Biden's federal vaccine mandate for millions of workers. That was done just with a wave of his magic wand he doesn't possess. Joe Biden declaring that millions of people would have to get vaccinated under OSHA guidelines. No Congress deliberated and wrote down and approved and voted on some new massive infringement of our liberties. Obviously, I would have objected even if they had. But this was just Joe Biden declaring that he had his power. Time and time again throughout the pandemic, we saw government officials, sometimes unelected officials, health officials at the state and local level assert that they could override obvious principles found in our Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Gorsuch. This was the most massive abridgment of our freedoms in decades. Obviously, you can find other significant abridgments of freedom throughout American history, don't get me wrong, but this was a massive step toward giving the health bureaucracy, the federal health bureaucracy, power over our lives.
Yeah,
and thanks to the Supreme Court to claw it
way
back.
Too much power. And it's very interesting now because people like Dr. Fauci, Leslie, are trying to be revisionist. They're trying to look at their own personal history with a kinder lens. People have the record. They know the truth. And Dr. Fauci mocked people for clinging to the idea of freedom when it was being taken away from them to a degree no one had anticipated. Your thoughts?
What I find interesting is that when I read Gorsuch's words, there were a couple of things that rang true for me. One, I thought he was talking about Donald Trump. I mean, the lockdowns came under Trump.
He
Title
could be.
42
There were two
came under Trump.
administrations that straddled the pandemic.
It's interesting how one person reads it and another reads it. But one of the problems that I have with this opinion is exactly what Americans have a problem with the Supreme Court on, and that is justices opining on things that deviate from the case. Title 42 expired. The court did not rule on it. The decision basically is made by a timeline, and the court not wanting to be a part of that, wanting to be a legislative process, as I believe it should as well. So for him to, in hindsight, which is always 2020, we can always say, well, now that we know this, let me give you my opinion. That's not what Americans mostly want to see the court do. There's a reason there's a blindfold on Lady Justice, and I wish we'd get back to that on the court, regardless
Actually,
if they're left
it's
or
very
right-leaning,
interesting because it is their
the
job to interpret the Constitution. The Constitution is the very thing that enshrines our freedoms, which were trampled upon. So that is his job, and that's what he was doing. Your thoughts, Charlie?
This case had nothing to do with...
Are you Charlie?
This case
are you
does not
Leslie? Are you
specifically
Leslie or
have to do
Charlie?
with
Because
COVID.
I think I said Charlie.
It's expired.
Yes.
Sorry.
Charlie?
She's identifying as Charlie right now.
I know.
No,
And she can
I
do
think
that.
it's terrific. The guy was like literally channeling Thomas Jefferson, talking about the degree to which our freedoms are always threatened by this concern for safety. And I get Leslie's point. I mean, when you look at all of the COVID regulations that trampled on all of our liberties, Title 42 was probably one of the least the least effective at trampling on our individual liberties. There were far worse ones, but God bless him for getting into it and addressing this the monstrosity that was Title 42 and all these other things that wrecked our lives in the name of safety during COVID.
Yes, and the power, so much power
point.
Concentrated in the hands of so few, that's authoritarianism. That is incredibly dangerous, and we have to make sure we don't go down that road again. But we want you to come down this road again anytime you want, Party Panel. Charlie, Leslie, and Robbie, beautifully done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you.